Ashton in Makerfield lies between St Helens and the town of Wigan, beside the M6 motorway. It would at first glance seem a highly unlikely place of pilgrimage. But a place of pilgrimage it certainly is, with people travelling from as far afield as Canada and the United States to visit here. So what is it that draws the faithful to this church, St Oswald's? The answer lies inside. The church is a remarkable achievement in architectural terms. Fine domed ceilings and magnificent stained glass. But these are not the only features that draw the faithful here. There's something else, something totally unique. This is the holy hand of Edmund Arrowsmith. People who come believe that the hand has healing powers, and many make long pilgrimages or send appropriate pieces of linen to be touched by the hand. To truly understand the faith which worshippers place in this holy hand, we must of course go back in history to Edmund Arrowsmith, whose hand it is. St Edmund Arrowsmith was born Brian Arrowsmith at Haydock in 1585, just about 1 mile from this spot. This was a time of great suffering for those following the Catholic faith, and it was considered an act of treason to hold or even attend a mass. Priests, if caught by the priest hunters, would be put to immediate and painful death. The ordinary Catholic layfolk risked fines, imprisonment, and confiscation of their lands for their beliefs. The Arrowsmith family suffered greatly at the hands of the priest hunters, as the religious persecutors were called. Thurston Arrowsmith, Robert's grandfather, had all his lands confiscated. Then he was imprisoned, and finally he was killed in Salford jail. Brian Arrowsmith was a pleasant child, well liked at school by all in Garswood. He was even liked by the Protestant schoolmaster at the village school, which still stands today, although it is now the library. When Brian was 8, he and his family were turned out of the house in the middle of a freezing winter night. His parents were arrested and imprisoned in Lancaster jail, eventually being released after paying huge fines. Brian, with his brother Peter, fled to Holland and Belgium to escape persecution. Both became soldiers for a while, and Peter later died from his wounds serving his regiment. In 1605, Brian fled to Spain, where he entered the seminary at Dunai. He made an oath confirming that he would return to work as a missionary priest in England, and on December the 9th, 1612, was confirmed to the priesthood, taking the name of Edmund, by which we know him. In 1613, Edmund arrived back in England to begin his work as a priest. His fervent and zealous nature was a cause of great concern among his fellow priests, who were facing yet another storm of persecution. For 10 years, Edmund worked in Lancashire. The base for him, as well as the 20 or so other priests working in the Lancashire area, was the Blue Anchor Inn at Brindle. Edmund's outspokenness in general, and in particular an argument with a Dr. Bridgman, then the Bishop of Chester, led swiftly to his arrest. However, at this time, around 1622, the king was arranging a Spanish marriage, and so as to aid this, many priests were released. Miraculously, Edmund found himself free again. 6 years later, Edmund was betrayed to the authorities by a young man called Holden, who was the son of the landlord of the Blue Anchor. Holden had been married by a Protestant minister to a lovely young woman, who was his first cousin. Father Arrowsmith told him that he should not live with her until he had applied for a special dispensation license from the Pope. This so angered Holden that he at once betrayed Father Arrowsmith to the local justice of the peace. This man was not a priest hater and had no wish to arrest Edmund. so he sent word that the priest hunters were on their way, so that Edmund could make good his escape. The young Edmund was duly warned, and mounted his horse and rode quickly in the direction of Preston across Brintle Moss. His way was suddenly blocked by a large water-filled ditch, which the horse refused despite many attempts to jump. At this point, Edmund's pursuers caught up with him and proceeded to attack him with sword and pike. Edmund managed to defend himself reasonably with a simple, stout stick. However, when this broke under the fury of his attackers' blows, he was overpowered. He was marched here to the Boar's Head at Brindle, which still stands today. He was then locked in a small outhouse, while his attackers spent the night revelling, spending the money they had stolen from him. The following morning, cold and tired, he was marched along this very road to his trial at Lancaster Castle. The judge at Edmund's trial was a notorious anti-Catholic named Henry Yelverton. On August 26, 1628, Edmund Arrowsmith was summoned to appear before this evil man. The trial, so very typical of its type, was a shambles, a mockery to justice, the outcome a foregone conclusion. The end came quickly, with Edmund time and time again refusing to deny his faith, often saying, "I will not defend my faith with my words, but will gladly seal it with my blood." Yelverton did not waste time. He ordered, "You shall be hanged by the neck until you be nearly dead, your limbs dismembered before your dying eyes, and thrown into the fire, where likewise your bowels shall be burnt, while your proud head shall be cut from your body, and set upon a pole atop of Lancaster Castle for all to see. The quarters of your remaining body shall be placed in the four corners of the castle, and may God have mercy on your soul." He ended his speech saying, "I would like that all the priests in England might endure the same sentence." On August the 28th, Edmund Arrowsmith was told he was to die that day, and his reply was, "I beseech my Redeemer to make me worthy of it." A large crowd gathered to witness the end. Bound to a hurdle and dragged by a horse, Edmund arrived at his place of execution. Witnesses stated, before Edmund was hung, that luminous shafts of light streamed to the place of execution. Many said they had never witnessed anything like it. Despite the authorities' best efforts, relics of Edmund were recovered. The most precious of these was one of his severed hands, which was taken and kept safely. Edmund Arrowsmith died a martyr, his memory kept alive by his dignity and strength of belief. And even now, every Sunday afternoon at St. Oswald's Church, the hand is venerated, and people go to receive its touch of blessing.
Time he'd had arthritis for 6 years. I took him to the service that Sunday. The Father Canon Ripley, at the time, he got the holy hand, and he rubbed it round his wrists and fingers, and we went home that night. And been home an hour or two, and I thought I'll just have a look at his hands. Do his physio exercise, which was bending the fingers, and used to feel the bones grit and rub. That Sunday when we got home, they didn't, and they never have done since.
Well, I felt like tingling when I felt St. Edmund Arrowsmith's hand, and I noticed improvement. I was doing the actual exercises on the hands and in the church, and when I got here, Dad did the same exercises on my fingers, and he noticed improvement too.
To locals, this is the place of Edmund Arrowsmith, and home to the Holy Hand. St. George's Hall, its courtrooms now dusty and disused, Our next tale follows the tragic life of the first American woman to be tried in a British court. Facing a society then drenched in social and sexual hypocrisy, this is the incredible story of Florence Maybrick and how she was brought to trial for the murder of her husband, James. It was in this very courtroom on July the 31st, 1889, that Florence Maybrick stood on trial for her life. The charge? Murder. In retrospect, and as we will see, it was never going to be a fair trial. But first, we must go back in time to when Florence first met her future husband, James Maybrick, a wealthy Liverpool cotton merchant. The year is 1880, and whilst on board a transatlantic steamer, Florence and James Maybrick met for the first time. James had been on a business trip to America, while Florence was en route to Paris with her mother. James Maybrick was captivated by this young woman, for she was only 18 years old, impulsive and a cosmopolitan girl, while he, 24 years her senior, became more and more enamored. By the end of the cruise, James had proposed. They were married in 1881, and after travelling around, they settled here, Battlecrease House in Aigburth in Liverpool. Affluent and content, Maybrick was, after all, a very successful cotton merchant. They settled down to married life. Soon there were children, 2 in all. To outsiders, Maybrick was wealthy and content, and Florence doted on the 2 children, while clearly revelling in the attention of male acquaintances. But all was not well. The couple were increasingly drifting apart. Maybrick himself was subject to fits of rage and violence. Whether this was because of the difference between their ages, nobody really quite knew. Florence's weakness was finance. She was finding it increasingly difficult to stay within her husband's considerable means, which was a source of conflict to both of them. James had become a whining hypochondriac, distressed by constant phantom aches and pains, a factor that was to become so important later at Florence's trial. Maybrick also had a growing drug problem. He was taking increasing quantities of arsenic, as a general pick-me-up, but also to bolster his declining sexual powers. Things were going from bad to worse. At this time, Maybrick had an associate, Alfred Brierly, who became extremely fond of Florence. One time, when James was away in America on more business, where he himself often frequented local brothels, Alfred and Florence entered into their doomed love affair, and even at one stage managed to spend 3 whole days together at a London hotel. James never really suspected anything, but always despised the comfortable manner Brierly showed whenever he was in the presence of his wife, and especially on one particular occasion at Aintree races, which they regularly attended. His jealousy was so intense, he gave Florence a black eye. In reality, all was lost. It was at this time that